First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this important event and for the invitation to present on behalf of the U.S. Department of Energy, where I am the director for the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, and also coordinate activities across DOE, have various roles over the last few decades here. And I have three main messages today. First is the sense of urgency in terms of the climate crisis, energy security, resiliency, the economic situation, the strife now and war around the world. And second is discuss our national strategy, our goals. And third is specific examples of collaboration. So first, let's start with the data. And if you look at the data in terms of the global challenge and the temperature increase, this is an unprecedented time in history. And you can see the data from just last year. So 2023, the hottest on record decades here, clearly showing that trend. So we all know this is the challenge that we are facing collectively. And the energy landscape in the US is shown here. And you can see historically, coal has been going down, which is a good sign. And you can see renewables as shown in this inset, a significant increase in renewables over the last few decades, but we still see significant use of fossil fuels. And so the Biden-Harris administration goals are net zero by 2050 and very ambitious interim goals, as you can see here as well, including a clean grid. And it's not just what these goals are, but how do we achieve them? And so very high priority for the administration is energy and environmental justice. And how do we ensure that disadvantaged communities do not experience injustice as they have in previous decades? So that is energy consumption. Now let's look at CO2. And you can see here, this is billions of tons of CO2. And you can see the breakout in the US across the different sectors, industrial, transportation, power generation, and our goals overlaid. And again, this is the challenge of a lifetime. We have to address all of these sectors to net zero. And we have a very comprehensive portfolio. It's all of the above strategy with renewables and fossil with CCS and nuclear. And hydrogen is one part of that comprehensive portfolio. And so there are many opportunities. But if you look at where we are today, we already produce about 10% of the global capacity of hydrogen, about 10 million metric tons, mostly for refining, fertilizer production, with over 1,600 miles of pipeline, 3 geological caverns, including the largest. And if you look at where we are seeing hydrogen production, and I'll talk about the hubs, you see the landscape here, and thousands of units now that are commercially available, deployed, or being planned. So that is a high-level snapshot. And of course, there is unprecedented legislation, including the bipartisan infrastructure law, which included $9.5 billion for hydrogen, including electrolysis, manufacturing, recycling, including hubs, which I'll talk about. We also have the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes significant tax credits, and it requires developing a national clean hydrogen strategy roadmap, which brings me to my second point and discuss the national strategy, which was released after public comment last year and has 3 main components. First, target strategic high impact uses of hydrogen, so especially those hard to decarbonize sectors. Second is we have to reduce the cost. And third, focus on regional networks as opposed to building out entire nationwide infrastructure. And of course, enabling activities like workforce and safety codes and standards. And the bottom line is we have our national vision, our goals are 10 million metric tons of clean hydrogen by 2030, double that by 2040, and 5 times that by 2050. And if we are successful in the deployment, that would enable up to 10% of total emissions reduction. So if we're trying to achieve net zero, 10% is significant. So many advantages there, and I'll go through each one of these. If we start with the high impact uses, I want to emphasize it's not just how much we can produce of hydrogen, but the demand opportunity. And there's a certain price threshold or willingness to pay where hydrogen will start to be competitive for different sectors. So for example, if we get to $5 or even $4 per kilogram delivered and dispensed, we could enable medium and heavy duty fuel cell trucks. For example, 10 to 15% of the trucks in the US market, which would use about 5 to 8 million metric tons. But to have a market penetration across these other sectors, we would have to reduce the cost of hydrogen to the end user. So for example, $3 or $2 opens up biofuels, power to liquid fuels, sustainable aviation, steel, ammonia, and long duration energy storage, chemical peat. So this is again one example of the type of market potential that we could unlock if we can get the cost down for hydrogen. So now if you take this and turn it vertically, that is what gets you our national strategy scenario. And so the first step is to catalyze the use of clean hydrogen in existing industries. So for example, ammonia, refineries, gradually start to scale up. You can see these additional market segments that start to become competitive as we get the cost down and build up the infrastructure and see that market expansion. And of course, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty in the dash line. There could be exports. And so that is the other major takeaway here is the uncertainty across the sectors. So we looked at different scenarios, the core scenarios here in dark green, and the more optimistic and conservative scenarios and across these different sectors based on a number of factors. So that is the first pillar. The second is to focus on cost. And of course, there are many challenges to hydrogen, public awareness, infrastructure, of course, advancements, safety concerns, but the number one that is constantly highlighted is cost. And so I think as most know, a couple of years ago, when President Biden asked our Energy Secretary, how do we really accelerate progress towards meeting our climate goals? That was the beginning of the Energy Earth Shot initiative. And Hydrogen Shot was the first with bold, easily articulated goal of 111, $1 for 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen in 1 decade. And in the US, hydrogen is only about $1.50 from natural gas. And so to be competitive, again, we're targeting in the long term, getting the cost of hydrogen down for that sustained market penetration after all the subsidies. And of course, we need to look at delivery, storage, all of the costs. And then finally, the third piece of strategy is the regional network. And we've set up a whole new Office of Clean Energy Demonstration to manage large-scale deployments and demonstration projects. And very exciting news that these hydrogen hubs were announced, they're in the process of being finalized. And in addition, funding was set aside to ensure demand and offtake. And so stay tuned, we'll have more information available on how we could accelerate the demand and the success of these hydrogen hubs. So I'd like to next talk about the whole of government approach as we look at coordinating with the private sector, communities, and more. And it's very exciting news. We have established a hydrogen interagency task force from the White House and 12 different federal agencies. And you can see all of them listed here. And there are 3 main categories of focus: supply and demand at scale, so ensuring that we have large-scale supply, low-cost supply, demand, and offtake in the US. Infrastructure, siting, piping, permitting, all of that are critical as well to address. And then analysis, the global supply chain, resiliency, and competitiveness, and cross-cutting topic of very high priority of workforce equity and justice. And so stay tuned. Feel free to look at the website, hydrogen.gov or hydrogen.energy.gov for DOE. But this is will be a portal for the whole of government's activities related to hydrogen. So the next step is global collaboration. So we're coordinating now across the entire US, across federal, state, local, communities, private sector. And the next step I want to cover is some examples of global coordination, as well as the very high priority of energy, environmental justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. So in terms of the environmental justice initiatives, here I want to emphasize the Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of specific federal benefits must impact disadvantaged communities. High priority there, workforce, community agreements. So for the first time, our funding will require community benefit agreements, diversity, equity, inclusion, jobs. And so our strategy includes numerous activities, so listening sessions, engaging, increasing the transparency, and also addressing a lot of the barriers such as safety, building skills, capacity building. Again, lots of feedback here and examples of very specific demonstrations, such as the UPS truck project in a disadvantaged community. I mentioned the cross-cutting team. And very recently, we've released draft responses. So there are often questions from the community, from the public, and there isn't that much awareness about hydrogen. So frequently asked questions such as safety and or NOx release when it comes to turbines. And so these are posted online, and we're continuing to gather feedback and refine these and then publish them as part of the HIT, the Hydrogen Interagency Task Force. And if we zoom out now in terms of international collaboration, there are many, many partnerships, bilaterals, multilaterals. For example, IPHE was formed 20 years ago. IEA was formed in the 1970s. We have Mission Innovation, the Clean Energy Ministerial. Again, many, many examples of partnerships. And so in order to leverage and coordinate, avoid duplication, we've, through the Breakthrough Agenda, which was launched at COP, identified across numerous countries these high priority areas: standards and certification, demand creation, research innovation, financing and investment, and really coordinating across the landscape. So please stay tuned. We'll be providing a lot more transparency, showing which organizations are focusing on which key activities. And again, really coordinating so we have all rowing the same direction in the same river. And finally, one example ranging from certification all the way up to outreach in STEM, very exciting with COP28, where 35 countries, and this is growing, launched a declaration of intent on mutual recognition of clean hydrogen certification schemes. Again, countries can have their own standards or certification approaches, but how do we recognize those as we facilitate international trade? Diversity, equity, inclusion partnership also announced at COP. And I'd like to give a big shout out to First Global, a nonprofit that's dedicated to advancing STEM. And for the first time, this is through robotics competition with students from 190 countries meet in Singapore last year for a hydrogen robotic competition. So these are just a snapshot of some of the activities that we are advancing. And as part of IPHE, if there are any students, postdocs, early career professionals in the audience, feel free to go to iphe.net for the Early Career Network with 500 members run by students, postdocs. They connect with each other, have webinars, and it's just a good way to connect with your counterparts and advance the next generation of leaders in hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. So we have many, many resources from the Department of Energy. Of course, feel free to mark your calendars for October 8th. In honor of the atomic weight of hydrogen, we've been celebrating this for almost a decade. Increase Your H2IQ webinars, the Center for Hydrogen Safety, which is global with over 100 members. And feel free to sign up to receive our newsletters and lots of information. And feel free to join on LinkedIn as well. So with that, I would like to again sincerely thank you for this event and wish you the very best for your conference. Thank you.